Cool, well thanks for joining us. My name's Lance, I'm an engineer at Huawei.
And I'm Harry, I'm an engineer with Red Hat.
And today we're going to go through the Rocky project update for Keystone.
All right, so first off we'll talk about what OpenStack Identity is. We'll talk about some of the things that we accomplished during the Queen cycle, what we're working on right now in Rocky, some of the things we're looking forward to in Stein, how to get involved with the Keystone project, and then some other sessions and talks that you might be interested in.
So Keystone's an implementation of OpenStack's Identity API, and it's found in just about every OpenStack deployment that you use. It's a shared service specifically for authentication and authorization, and it supplies end users and services with information about users in the deployment, projects, domains, role assignments. Anything that falls underneath that identity umbrella is either coming from Keystone or passing through Keystone at some point. It also acts as a broker between OpenStack and other identity services like LDAP or external identity providers. Before we get into the project update, we wanted to share some information from our user survey last year. And these are areas where our users told us that we could improve, with federated identity enhancements being at the top and per domain configuration being at the bottom. But you can expect to see these pop up through our presentation as we talk about what we've worked on and what we're working towards. And with that, I'll hand it off to Harry to talk about what we did last release.
Yeah, so Queens was a pretty good release for us. We landed a whole lot of things, actually. So first off, application credentials. Thank you, Colleen. This allows users to create application credentials, which they can, or from their apps, so that they can authenticate to Keystone using that application credential and a secret string. This allows users to delegate a subset of their role assignments on a project to an application credential, granting them the same restricted authorization to the project. We'll be expanding this soon, including capability lists. We've also added system scope and system role assignments. So system scope is basically a new authorization target. This is part of a larger series of work that we're doing related to improving the policy experience in general for OpenStack. Going along with that were the Oslo policy library improvements. So in preparation for system scope, we needed to make Oslo policy able to understand it. And also Oslo policy now has the ability to deprecate policies in a consistent manner across the services. We also landed unified limits with a flat enforcement model. Presently, it's marked as experimental. We're hoping to move that into stable during the Rocky release. The goal is to provide a consistent experience across systems to provide limits, ignoring project hierarchy. You can model a hierarchy if you want to, but right now it's really complicated, I think. And that'll be improving in the near future. Projects can also be tagged in Keystone using simple strings. This makes them easier to search, filterable. So for example, Christy actually had a pretty nice example. If you have a, say, spring 2018 semester and you have a bunch of servers that you wanted to clean up after the fact, if you tag them ahead of time, you can now go and make sure that those are all cleaned up. And after many years of deprecation, we finally removed the V2 API. So that was, I'm excited about that. Cool. Lance, what are we working on right now?
So we've got a few different things staged for Rocky. First on that list is improving the experience around default roles. If you're familiar with Keystone's installation process, you might already know that you get one role out of the box, and that's an admin role. We're going to be adding 2 new roles to that. One's going to be a read-only role, and then the other is going to be something that sits in between that read-only role and the admin role if you were to think about authorization on a spectrum. So what this really means is that Keystone is going to be focusing on 3 specific things. We're going to be making sure that those 3 roles are available after the bootstrap process. We're going to be working those default roles into our policies so that when Rocky goes out the door, you should actually be able to start using them out of the box and having them behave as you would expect them to. If you have your own custom policies rolled, that's fine. It'll be backwards compatible if you maintain your own policies. And then finally, we're going to be working on an experimental gate job to test this with DevStack, Tempest, and Patrol once we get the correct RBAC behavior that we want. We'll also be stabilizing the Unified Limits API. As Harry said, this is marked as experimental in the Queens release. So we came up with a list of things that we want to change about it before we actually fully support it. Going hand in hand with that, we're going to be implementing a strict hierarchical enforcement model, and this is going to contrast the flat enforcement model that we implemented last release. And it's going to carry opinions about how resources, limits, and usage should work across a tree of projects. We'll also be expanding on the application credential work by adding a new attribute to it called capability lists, and this is going to really tighten down the security for people writing applications against OpenStack. You're actually going to be able to use the list to specify exactly what APIs you want your application to use. And then finally, we're going to be smoothing out some of the usability issues that we have with multi-factor authentication, which Keystone has natively supported since Newton. We're going to be making it more discoverable and making it easier for users to step through those auth factors before they get a token. So now we'll take a look at what we're looking at beyond Rocky.
So there's going to be a lot of cross-project work that we're doing in Stein. Lance talked about default roles. So during Stein, we hope to have proofed out some of the work in Keystone and Barbican, and then start asking for adoption from some of the other services. Again, making the policy experience better out of the box with testing. This is all leading into what we hope to be a community goal for OpenStack-wide default roles in the T release. We also created, or are creating, the Oslo limit library in the Rocky cycle. And this is part of making the Unified Limits API stable. The next step is going to be working with the other services to integrate the Oslo Limits library into their services and then into their respective workflows. And then finally, we are looking at some federated identity improvements. It was probably the #1 user request on the survey. So we'll be continuing our work with shadow users, integrating native SAML support, and then working on some Keystone to Keystone federated performance improvements. So Lance, how do people get involved if they're interested?
So if there's anything that we've talked about that sounds interesting to you or maybe affects how you're going to use OpenStack, we'd love to have you get involved upstream. And we've been working on a couple of different ways to make Keystone easier to contribute to, especially for part-time developers. The first is office hours, and we do these every Tuesday after our weekly meeting, and it's really just a block of time where you can come by and get questions answered if you want eyes on a patch. We also use it as an opportunity to keep our bug queue down and do like group code reviews. So great time to come get FaceTime with the team. We also do weekly reports, and we send these to the OpenStack dev mailing list every Friday. This is a snapshot of everything that we've done throughout the week, and it also includes important deadlines that we might have coming up. So this is a great way to get that information without having to go read a bunch of IRC logs. And I also want to touch again on the cross-project initiatives that we have going on. Consistent default roles, you've heard Harry talk about it. He's been pushing a lot of these discussions. We're really shooting for a consistent experience across OpenStack as a platform. And then the second thing is Oslo limit integration. With where we're at with the Unified Limits API and the enforcement models, we're at a good point for services to start adopting that work and then incorporating it into their services. And these are very big initiatives and they require a lot of work, but like I said, we're at a point where we can start going and pushing on them in each service. So if you're interested in any of these initiatives, please come find us and talk to us. We'd be happy to help in any way that we can. So now Harry's going to tell you where you can find us the rest of the week.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of forum sessions going on. I think some of you were actually in the default roles talk that we had this morning. Tonight at 5:10 is our project onboarding. Tomorrow morning at 11, we have a forum on edge architecture. And then we have our operator feedback session tomorrow evening at 5:30. And then finally, a unified limits discussion on Thursday at 3:30 in the afternoon. There's also several talks. Adam Young is giving a talk on unified approach for RBAC. It's going on concurrently with this discussion. We have an integrating Keystone with centralized authentication tomorrow at 9:50 in the morning. Tomorrow afternoon at 1:50, there's a Kubernetes and OpenStack policy management talk. Application credentials in Keystone, Wednesday at 5:30. And then finally, a centralized policy enforcement on Thursday at 11. So with that, I think we can open up to questions and answers. If anyone wants to talk, please use the mic, or we can repeat the question for those that are listening after the fact.
Are you doing something for like site-to-site replication or using one Keystone database for multiple stacks?
Is this kind of like multi-region support?
Yeah, multi-sites and multi-region.
We are going to be having a forum session to go through some of that tomorrow. I believe that's in the morning, but it's related to like the fog edge use cases and making Keystone work for those kinds of deployments. So we certainly plan to get into that tomorrow for sure.
What time?
11?
Yeah.
So during the unified roles thing this morning, there was the matrix, and one of the rows in the matrix was scoping to system versus scoping to project. Is that a thing that's implemented and exists in Queens, or is that aspirational?
No, that exists, and that was a feature enhancement to the Oslo policy library. With all of the movement to move policy into code, we added a new attribute to the policy registration that includes scope types, and that's where that stuff lives. So you can either define a policy as being a project-specific policy or a system-specific policy, or both. So that's how we communicate that. And which
Okay,
is consumed.
I'll maybe have to look at it
Sorry,
myself, but
it's
so it's the
consumed.
same role name, but different.
It's consumed through the services as they register their policies in code.
Okay.
So as they go through and move all of that in to their code base, and then they give it a default, they may supply additional documentation for it there. An additional attribute that they can set is a scope type. So what they're saying is that, you know, this is a project-specific policy, which means in order to actually access it, you need a project scope token.
I see. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.